in a digital transformation, the key term there is transformation. And transformation is more about people, culture, and relationships than it is about technology at all.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to our conversation series on the Office of Transformation, what it means to be a kind of leader in corporate innovation. I have with me today Seth Webster. Seth, we've had the benefit of kind of crossing paths a few times. Always excited to chat with you. You're always into interesting things. Maybe take a minute to introduce yourself here and tell us a little bit about what you're doing and your journey to get there.
I've moved through my career in software development into software management, managing teams doing mostly customer-facing software as a service type work. And that has all kinds of levels of complexities from a digital standpoint on what are you even building to, how do you deliver what you built, how do you scale what you built, and how do you support that? And went from mortgage to like the tax industry. So, experiencing the difference between dealing with real estate brokers, which can be kind of like the Wild West, to dealing with tax, where you better have all of your T's crossed and I's dotted and buttoned up for compliance purposes on running these numbers that people are going to submit to the federal government, to moving into now in a more consumer-based approach where at Brinks Home, we are providing security for life to customers. When you're talking about securing somebody's home, it feels very much more tangible, real, and noble or meaningful in some way. So knowing that, when you are safe, you're on vacation or you're at home and asleep, what we provide to you is the security that we've got your back. We want to give you peace of mind, and digitizing that, right, and having a touch point that because you've got grandmas, right, who widowed, living on their own, want a secure system, know that they're safe, until the kids come by and visit and hang out, all the way down to new homeowners who are raised on technology and have a very different experience and expectation on how they interface with your physical products as well as your digital products through support and all that.
So that's really interesting. You mentioned a couple regulated industries, and I've spent a decent amount of my career in and around that as well. What's your kind of take on when people think about innovation and disruption and kind of breaking rules and moving fast, but in regulated industries or things related to people's personal finances, right, well-being, it can take on kind of a different level, right, of what it means to have a kind of product or a team. Are there regulatory issues that kind of are environmentally with the work you're doing today, or was there things that you feel like are, if there isn't, what do you see as kind of, does it mean you guys can innovate faster? Does it mean, what does it actually mean on the ground?
I mean, surprisingly in the security industry, there's not we're not manufacturing our own equipment. So there's probably some compliance level there, right? On what you need to do. And then the key piece of making sure you're monitoring somebody's signals. So when something does happen, and you let them know, that's a pretty tight band, but that's also really well understood technology. And we're actually going through a major process right now where we're upgrading from 3G cellular bands into more modern cellular bands for the backup systems on these devices that don't have the Wi-Fi or landline connection. And so, that's got its own regulatory complexities around it, but most of that is managed from an ops standpoint. It's less innovation. So on the innovation side, I think in the home security sector, there's a lot wider berth of freedom there where we could move fast. But back in the tax industry, you had to be really cautious, right? So I love this statement, fail fast. And I think that creating a culture where failure is embraced, understood as part of the process where you learn to success, you still have to couch what failure means, right? And, a tax form filed incorrectly is not an okay failure. But how somebody interfaces with the completion of that form is fine, as long as the calculation turns out. If that experience is not the best, but you're getting out there to try new innovative ways of doing things. Like, can I actually complete a Schedule C on a mobile device or a tablet, or is that form too complex to do? It might fall on its face, like accountants are not going to be punching in customer Schedule C information at the airport on their phone, but maybe they would. So you try it, right? That's an okay failure to have. Like, that didn't work, and we moved beyond it. But I think when you're regulated, you just have to really have a clear communication to what is deemed acceptable failure, right?
Yeah.
And I think that segueing a little bit there to that fail fast environment, because as we get into more about what transformation office means, it needs to be creating a culture that embraces failure, but you also really need to explicitly communicate what that means. You can't leave it to interpretation, because then when things fail in a wrong way, you can undo the culture of safe failure by addressing it. But then you can't be shackled to not be able to address those failures in a way that is necessary, by being afraid you're going to ruin a culture. So having really clear definitions of what some of that means, whether you're regulated or not, is important. On the regulatory side, that's going to be driven for you from the compliance.
It springs to mind, like from my earliest software days, the idea that most projects fail because of lack of shared understanding. And in early software and the chunky kind of transition from waterfall, iterative, agile kind of deliverables, having a business glossary. And I remember some of my first assignments in finance where I'm like, thank God there's a business glossary that defines all these terms of art of the industry, because I have no idea what they are. And so when I think about applying that, when you're talking about running a change program at a company where everyone could have a different definition of failure. And I think in the kind of product and innovation, corporate innovation context, that, hearing folks clarify that, like, well, yes, we want to fail, but we actually want learning. And I think there's, a lot of emerging discussion around, like, learning as an object. How do we correlate? We had an assumption, we had an experiment, it succeeded, it failed, it tied to some kind of learning. And how do we make sure that that isn't lost in the race to get the experiment done? You know what I mean? So that we're then making some kind of decision. So,
well, and even on that note, financial thresholds, right? Like, it's not okay for you to fail with $50 million, but maybe it's okay for you to fail with a $500,000 attempt at something that has a good upside if it succeeds, and if not, okay. So, and you need to clarify that across the board.
Yeah, that's also very, very true. So, when I think about Brinks, and I think about, just my experience with having kind of security systems and thinking of it as a service more so than a product, you know what I mean? And from the outside, maybe you could help me, others may clarify some of this kind of, potential assumptions. But what I assume is, like, okay, you have this service and it's monitoring and it's passive, and then around you, your consumer is getting kind of very comfortable with an interactive experience. And there's all of this kind of, when I think about my security cameras now, every time the dogs walk outside, I get a text message with a video that someone's out. It's so much more interactive. And transitioning that, from a business model, from a team organization, like, just maybe help frame the, what was the environmental context that Brinks going through that created the need or the executive mandate to move here? And maybe just help us understand, where were they when you kind of joined them, and where are they in the journey, and what does that mean for the team that you're on, and what you guys do day to day?
So I've been with Brinks for 2 years, and they kind of started down this road of transformation a little bit before I got onboarded. And I actually got onboarded as a product manager into the company, and then moved into the transformation side of things within about a year and a half. Which I hands down love. I went from software development to dabbling in product management to finding an opportunity in transformation. And that is such a good fit for the value that I think I bring to an organization, and what Brinks is trying to head towards. So with that being said, the genesis of it all, I'm not really clear on, and don't think I could speak to it incredibly well. There obviously were some acquisitions that occurred, but not obviously, but there are some acquisitions that occurred a little bit more consumer facing, push, the obviously disruptors in the industry like Simply Safe, Ring, going after that kind of DIY market that causes you to kind of rethink who you are and what you're approaching. So I think that kind of summarizes it from a real high level perspective.
Sure.
Specifically where we're at though now is that, our organizational goal, and I couch that as the organizational goal because it's not our overall mission, which is really to provide security for life, peace of mind to our customers. Our organizational mission is to create profitable accounts at scale and hold them for life, which is a phrase our CEO coined. That the man is very masterful, and we approach our organization at this point with the transformation in mind as a $500 million startup. And so the goal is to think innovatively and think about how we can best serve our customers, a lot through digitization, right? Automation and meeting customers in this digital world that we're in, but as much so on culture and mindset within the organization on being incredibly customer focused, customer centric, and using technologies to accomplish that, and not using technologies where they aren't actually accomplishing that. And I think that given the change of, like with millennials and younger generations coming into the market, home ownership is kind of being deferred. There people aren't getting into home ownership, in their early 20s, getting married and buying a home. It's not the number one goal of adulthood now. It's to get out of college, get married, and buy a home and start building the family or building the community. Things have changed. The atmosphere has changed, and that sense of ownership isn't as great. So now you have a lot of renters, and our landlords providing the monitoring service, or is this a service that I consume at the allowance of the landlord, or am I in an apartment, and what does that look like? And then that sense of ownership has a significant impact on how they view something like alarming. It's electricity, internet, really at this point, gas, like these are all utilities that are givens with whatever place you're going to be in to reside. Security, we would love to be viewed as a utility, much the same, that you can't separate electricity from the place that you live. We would love at Brinks Home for you to think that same way about security, because this is where your life is. This is where your home is. It's where your things are, and so we want you to think of it as a utility in that sense. But it's a different dynamic today. And so really digital technologies and having this transformation approach is, how do we maintain relevance and provide that value at that kind of utilitarian level for these younger generations that don't even view home ownership in the same way that previous generations had necessarily.
So that's really interesting. I think, when talking to companies, that their revenue model, their business model has been on a generational plateau. And to your point, these kind of tidal shifts, right, in just kind of different generations having a different experience and viewing the product service mix kind of differently. I guess that kind of starts to build a critical mass where this internal need for a business to go from being operationally efficient to redefining who's the customer. Is it the landlord? There's these multiple new classes of personas. And that is very different than just a status quo, right? Run the business kind of machinery. So, it brings to question, like, people often wonder, where do I start? And how many places do I start? What's the right sequence? How did you guys approach that? Or when you joined the transformation office, can you maybe describe a little bit, where were they? How's the office structured?
Yeah.
How do you look at
we actually adopted the McKinsey model directly. Like, we had hired McKinsey, they came in, they established the McKinsey transformation office. And my first exposure to that was having deep expertise in software development, software management. It was really helping operational efficiencies on how we interface with the initiatives, right? The work that we're trying to do transformationally for the organization, to the resource constraints that come with running things through software, right? Or IT, which most of the digitization efforts are going to require some element of that. There is a lot of transformation initiatives that don't necessarily require that, especially as you mature as an organization in your technology, a lot of times it doesn't require as much, interfacing or being coupled at the hip with the development and IT teams to be able to accomplish tests and changes in your environment. So McKinsey follows kind of a stage-gated process, right? So you go from an initiative that is an idea and it's at some level, and then you progress that through a process to vet the idea, determine the value of the idea, prioritize that idea against other ideas, establish what, are like work streams, like what are kind of the areas categorically that we're attacking. And I love that model, but I don't think it answers your question of what is an idea that is getting vetted into an initiative. And what I feel like I discovered early on coming onto the transformation office is that it is oftentimes underappreciated the amount of work it takes to vet an idea. And if you bring all the ideas to the table across the board and you just open it wide, you're going to get a ton of ideas. But we know not every idea is a good idea. Not every idea is a good idea right now. Even the good ones. Yeah. So, but to figure that out, right? If you just laid it all out on a table, it takes effort, it takes work, it takes resources. And so it helped us to establish kind of the work in progress, right? Your WIP. And so borrowing from agile processes in the agile mindset. And again, at some level, I think digital transformation is icing on the cake of agile, right? Like agile is this very fundamental core mindset. And it's embracing ambiguity, embracing change, learning to success, failing fast. And then you put frameworks and methods all around that, right?
So that is the core engine. Like you said, I remember a former colleague of mine saying once, you can't be lean if you're not first agile. Like you can do all the lean startup in the world. If you actually can't have a high estimation confidence and build something and get it done, then you got nothing.
I agree. And I think that, you can do lean, you can do scrum, you can do transformation offices, but you have to be agile. Like agile is a mindset. It is a way of viewing the world and deciding. And honestly, if I were to boil it down, I feel like agile is organizations admitting they don't know everything, and they're not going to spend all this energy and money and effort on hiring people to be experts in figuring out what everything is going to look like in the future. Instead, we decide we don't know, we're going to embrace that, and we're going to have processes that allow us to work within that ambiguity and get high success out of it. And obviously, the diminishing bell curve of diminishing returns, where the more precise you try to be, the higher degree of failure you have in hitting that precise target. Agile really just embraces that. So in the transformation part, it's taking a concept of agile, which is how much work are we actually doing? Can we even see how much work we have on the table? And if not, then let's visualize that. Once you visualize that, it's kind of like dealing with your own personal finances. If you got a lot of crap going on, it's a big, scary thing. But once you put it to paper and look at it, you're like, okay, it is big and scary. There is a lot of stuff, but now I can see this is something we can manage. So by identifying how much work in progress you have around ideation, it helps you realize we got way too many ideas coming to the table, which forces prioritization conversations, which are always healthy. But then again, you got to do some work to know, what's the value of this and what's the effort of this to determine its priority against something else. So then how do you handle that, right? So then how do you constrain the ideas without missing out on the next major thing that's going to innovate for the company, right? I have found that approaching, and we're getting closer and closer to it as an organization, but the real driver is OKRs. I find to be an incredibly successful framework. So, for anybody that's not familiar, objectives and key results are 3 to 5 major things that the organization wants to accomplish this year. And then you set up key results that are actual measurable things that if you accomplish those key results for that objective, they will accumulate to completing the objective. And if you can be precise with that and let that be the primary constraint of ideation, then the key results become the objectives of the work streams for the people that are coming up with the initiatives to accomplish that. Now, you still want to leave the door open for, left field ideas to be able to come in. But if you use kind of the 80-20 rule loosely, probably 80% of the ideas are going to align directly to the organizational goals for the year. And 20% might be ideas that you got to spend some effort vetting in a way to determine if there's value or not. Being an idea that's not a major objective. Then you weigh that against, is it worth doing this at the expense of something that's moving toward an objective, given the opportunity cost or value or whatever, or can we fit it in parallel, depending on whatever it is? I found that using a framework like that helps keep you from thrashing on all the possibilities down to possibilities that we think matter in the near future.
Yeah, and I'm curious, have you guys been doing OKRs the whole time that you've been there?
We have not. In fact, the CEO brought a stack of Measure What Matters books to the organization, and they sat on somebody's desk. And when I joined the transformation office, we saw the pile there. A buddy of mine that I've been working with for a while saw a pile there, grabbed a copy for him and for me so that we both had hard copies of it. Then I asked the person who had the books, like, hey, like, awesome, where's it? And we got it from the CEO. And I'm like, well, why aren't we doing this? And they're like, it's whatever. And so I think he brought the idea to the table and it never just got traction.
Literally brought the idea to the table. Yeah.
Literally. But if you look at we call them big rocks, right? So if you look at our big rocks from 2021 to 2022, we went from good generalized, and that was when our CEO took over the organization, was in 2021, and he defined these objectives. Well, in 2022, our objectives have these very specific measurements to them, and we've been working toward that. So you can see the progenesis of these ideas, but formalizing that is what we're working toward. And in the transformation office, we're the ones trying to bring, right? It shouldn't be the CEO's responsibility to say, this is our mode of work. The transformation office kind of has a responsibility there to identify if that's actually going to be effective, visit it around the organization and make sure you're going to get buy-in and understand the challenges and pushback you might get, and then get alignment and roll.
So just a structural question then, Seth. So, as I hear you talking, I'm hearing, there's a software engineering or platform engineering team. There's obviously big ops team, still a big part of that business. Is there a kind of separate product organization? And then can you just talk about, so is it fair to, I guess the way I'm hearing it, is the transformation office essentially responsible for executing the OKR process across these other organizations and helping run the prioritization piece of that from the business side? Can you maybe talk about, like, where does your organization sit relative to engineering, relative to product, and how it interacts with, say, the business?
Yeah, great question. So we're an independent office. We have a chief transformation officer who would be kind of your chief digital officer equivalent. And there's nuances in those terms, but yes, I mean so our charter, right, is a transformation officer, or the marching orders of our transformation officer running the transformation office is to create enterprise value by identifying, coaching, and executing strategic initiatives in order to deliver these key results for the organization. Identifying is that piece there that the OKRs help factor in. Now, we're not doing it formally as objectives and key results. The goal is to really push that in 2023, so that we're all using the same vernacular. Back to your statement about shared understanding, right? We explicitly define what these things mean. So right now, the transformation office understands that we're trying to align these ideas to the objectives. So as we identify the initiatives that we should be pursuing, we kind of throw out ideas that don't align by asking the initiative owner, well, how does this help move any of these objectives forward? And if the answer is, well, it doesn't move any of them forward, then our current operation model is to say, okay, can you go get like VP sponsorship on this, right? Or somebody that has a stake in it to come make the case as to why we should be doing something that doesn't directly tie back to one of these three major objectives the CEO and senior executive team have laid out for us this year. So once you adopt like the OKR framework, that becomes much easier because you have the whole process of everybody developing those objectives, key results together. So then if you take the identifying, coaching, and executing on these strategic initiatives, where we sit is primarily in that coaching role, right? So that's our charter. Our mission is, or our key characteristics and critical actions as transformation office employees the characteristics are authenticity, leadership, and urgency. Right? You can't always expect everybody in the organization to carry the right sense of urgency around what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
It's massive. And so it's really the primary responsibility of the transformation office to keep that energy up, to keep the urgency up, and to continually communicate that. You're a cheerleader in a lot of ways. And so if you show up to work and you're not feeling it, you better put on that cheerleading skirt and start rah-rahing the group, right? Because you have to develop that culture so that the contagion of that starts to perpetuate, but the accountability of making sure that that's being done is on the TO in a transformation. The critical actions that we do is collaborate, communicate, and serve, right? So we have to do everything collaboratively. So we coach. We are not on a department team. We're not doing the work of these teams. We are coaching our initiative owners to oversee the implementation of these initiatives. And it's our responsibility to make sure that the collaboration is high, that they're not siloing their work, that the right stakeholders are involved, that shared understanding is occurring across the different departments. And then communication, right? Like, I mean, that is the basis of life. And where communication stops, abnormality sets in. So and the ultimate abnormality is death, right? So your project dies, your initiative dies. You don't even get it off the floor in order to figure out, did it do anything for us? So communication is incredibly high, and you need to make sure that that is occurring on a regular basis. And then serve, right, is the ultimate thing. Like, our success in the transformation office is when our initiative owners succeed in executing their initiatives to produce outcomes, and that makes the business succeed. So our success is the initiative owner's success, which is Brinks' success. And we have to measure our success on not the initiative outcomes. We should measure ourselves on how well are we serving our stakeholders in the organization. And so I always view our stakeholders as customers. And so we may not be directly serving Brinks customers in the transformation office, but we are serving the people who do, and they are our customers. And we need to have the exact same mentality we want our initiative owners to have for their customers out there in their homes. We have to approach our customer service in the same way as we embrace our initiative owners.
It's interesting because when I think about, there's always forward-leaning people in every company, and they're the evangelists, and having a formal office that enables those evangelists, right, to actually be an internal, almost consulting org. So in terms of the dynamic with the business units, I'm assuming there's some level of like push and pull where they can request support from the team, right, as they want to bring in and kind of skill up, level up their folks. There are initiatives coming down, from sounds like kind of executive tier and yearly priorities that you guys are going to act as kind of part of the enablers of. I've seen a lot of tools, and as we started to roll out OKRs a year ago at Modus, I was surprised to see the level of OKR tools and ones that then go into the other part of it, the CFR. What is it? Conversation. But you know,
the way you rate somebody's performance.
Yeah, exactly. And
because the objectives don't measure. You're not performance managing on objective execution.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, coming from again shared software background, to you, and being familiar with kind of software backlogs and other things, and OKRs are different, and have you guys found, just in terms of how your team works, are you using a tool? Did you make some, of your own homegrown master spreadsheet? What actually keeps that shared understanding? And I guess if I could extend that question a little bit, so you've been there for 2 years, COVID's been going on for 2 years, handling distributed and remote or forced remote lockdown. Obviously it's got to throw some monkey wrenches and things and change how you guys work. Maybe 2 parts. One, what tool chain are you finding success with maintaining the collaboration and communication? And then 2, in terms of the working cadence of being distributed and remote or COVID, how did that layer in and affect your work?
So I love the question about the COVID reaction, because really the transformation office really proved its value in the quick pivot that had to happen organizationally to get that executed. And by establishing initiatives to drive the outcomes of being able to stay in business through the shutdown, because you got to remember, we've got call centers, right? We've got sales reps that call out, and we got people that sit on phones handling emergency dispatch situations, right? And you can't let that lapse.
Yeah, that's for real.
We crushed it. We crushed it as an organization. We responded. Everybody stepped up, and we're now in a position where we actually just announced that we're not coming back full time into the office. More than welcome to come kick it in the building if you want, but we're managing all the organization primarily remote. And that's demonstrable of not only our quick ability to react and get set up to handle it, but the success that we've continued to maintain even in that environment, which I've been a huge fan of remote work forever. I packed up my family in an RV, drove them around the country for a year
right, I forgot
while
about
doing
that.
my job. Yeah, so I've always been an advocate for remote and see the success. Obviously, it's pretty industry or job specific. There are some things that you have to be co-located to do. But within reason, there's a lot you can do remotely. And the tools that we kind of use are, and this has been true with every organization that I've been at since being in the enterprise workforce in 2011, has been Atlassian's products are by far and beyond the best at driving that kind of easy adoption to collaboration. But a big piece of that is, from a TO perspective, right? One of the elements of serve and being a coach is that we should own the processes interdepartmentally. Once we've established a culture of being able for one department to easily engage with another department without disrupting what's going on, until that occurs, we need to grease those gears, right? And the reason being is that through transformation, your processes are going to change. And you don't want the tail wagging the dog. So you don't want the processes to be the ones that dictate interactions. And if people are struggling engaging from one department to another department because you don't have the culture of cross-function yet, and you leave it to them to say, okay, hey, I'm coaching you on this initiative. Great idea. You need to get this group involved and have them do this thing. And they don't quite understand the process, or it's a complicated process. They're not going to be successful in that, which is now going to have its cascading effect on your initiative. So from my perspective, if there isn't a clear path to interaction, then the TO needs to be facilitating those interactions. So with that being said, like we use SharePoint, we use Microsoft Teams, we have Atlassian products, Jira and Confluence. On the technology side, Atlassian reigns. On the business side, SharePoint, Microsoft products reign. We are working through better ways to assess collaboration across the organization. And really the adoption of kind of the OKRs and the way that we're ideating is all impacting the tools that we are using. So we are in a fluid state. Are we always going to be in a fluid state? I don't know, right? It kind of goes to that constantly learning to your point, but at some point you also got to go all in on some solution so that there is that shared context. Everybody's thinking the same way. So our kind of main tool that we're using right now is like, I'm a safe agilist, but I'm not a framework junkie, and I'm not, or a lackey, right? Like hey, Scrum is the only way to do agile. And here's how you do it. And safe is the way to scale it across a large organization, right? You've got less, you've got plenty of other frameworks. But what I did find is that our most successful teams so far in the organization that have delivered initiative over initiative, and produced actual outcomes from those initiatives. Because don't get me wrong, we've completed a lot of initiatives that did not move needles, right? And that's another function of the TO, is that you need to keep score, right? You need to know, are we actually producing outcomes, which is the ultimate goal. It's not doing the work of the initiatives. It's moving needles, right? And so the teams that have been the most successful in that have taken kind of these large objectives and broken them down into what are we going to focus on and what are we going to attack quarter over quarter in order to move into that. Then from that quarterly level, we break it down from a TO perspective. We're meeting every other week, and we kind of look at our KPIs and metrics monthly for the lagging indicators. We try and be in front with the leading indicators as much as possible, but those are really hard to define.
The companies that get caught in the trap of process adherence, to your point, where I think part of the job is defining what does Agile mean at this organization, what implementation framework or what stealing ideas from multiple are going to get us to the cadence that works for this organization. The firms that seem to have an overly rigid PMO and they follow the process have a higher, I remember running a kind of an analysis for one firm where, they had projects failing at 98% complete. Process adherence complete into the 90s, actual things getting done, code in production, dollars being generated, again, it's, to me, defining those metrics is a huge part. I wanted to ask you, just kind of jumping back to something else you said, talking about getting clues in on this voice of the customer, and you have this, kind of part of your organization, which is talking to customers, obviously in moments of crisis and other things. How do you guys represent that voice of the customer? And is there software, there's a class of software I got exposed to a few years ago where it was kind of selling itself as innovation management software. It's basically digital suggestion box for the front office. And I was curious if you guys have kind of formally looked at that, or, how do you obviously are getting calls, you're getting issue types and other things. I don't know necessarily if that's related to, insights on product innovation or other things, but can you maybe speak a little bit to, so you're setting up these metrics, how are you involving the voice of the customer? How are you kind of pulling into the front office side? And then after that, I'll have just another follow-up on kind of this idea that digitizing the front office is as big as having a software competency.
So I think that's a phenomenal question. And there's not been an organization that I've been in where they've gotten out of the building near enough, right? I mean, that's an analogy, but like getting involved in the customers and really having a culture of walking hand in hand, right, with your customers for the service that you're providing in order to make sure that you're doing for them what they want done. There's a couple different ways that we approach that, and I'm not an expert on our marketing side of the organization or our customer advocacy group, because again, being new to the transformation office this year, that a lot of that's being unpacked for me. I'm very focused on the ops side and how we're servicing existing customers through our standard services that we provide, and there's a little less. There's opportunities for innovation there, but less so than kind of on the front end, like selling and branding and all that. So on that part of the organization, there is obviously you've got your NPS score. You've got we use Medallia as some tools and some others on how to understand how your customers are feeling about what you're doing, making sure that you're engaging them with the right questions based on the touch points that they're having with you. But really underlying all that, I think it's like, I don't care if you're using a Google form, right, to get feedback. I don't care if you're making phone calls or doing, customer research groups or user interaction video sessions. At the end of the day, how are you aggregating that data and understanding it so that it's a good representation of what you've got? Because if all you're doing is calling customers, you're not getting big enough sample sizes to understand your overall base, and then you kind of get this recency bias or a myopic view that you're translating into your larger population, which may not be true. And that is an area that in every organization I've been in has been one that has a lot of room to mature in. Now we're doing a much better job of it. Last couple of years, we established an enterprise data hub. Business analytics business intelligence became one of the large marching objectives that we've had. And so it's kind of like this kid in a candy store, like the data availability is growing and how to look at it and put it together. Some people want that freakonomics approach. Like, I want to see, how this measures up against that just for crazy fun. At other times it's like, is this really telling us what we think it's telling us? And that is a component that I think from the transformation office standpoint has been critical to what we do, which is there's a process where you move from idea to this is now an actual identified initiative, and you assign the stakeholders that are going to be involved in the initiative owner. And then you move it into this stage where it's you're doing all the validation, right? You're making sure that you understand what are the metrics we're going to measure, what is the value going to be that we add, what's the cost of the effort to do it. And in that, you want to move through these gates as quick as possible. But this stage is a good stage to kind of slow down and say, okay, what are the metrics we're going to use? And what are the reports that we're using to demonstrate, like, show me that metric baselined, right? Like I want to see it flatlined with no movement. And then when this goes out, when we move it to the gate that is the execution gate, and then you hit a money step, like we did the thing. Now you're measuring it for the outcome. You should already have the data ready to go. So as soon as you get the first blip on the radar, you can see it. And in an organization that is maturing through its ability to measure impact and understand value that's being added, you have to really take the time, and I think the TO is a great place to do it, as you're doing these initiatives to transfer the organization, to require the ability to see the baseline before you do the outcome to move it. Now, customer advocacy is a component of that. That's data and feedback that's coming in just as much as, how many referrals are we getting through this new referral program, right? That are little more objective measures that you can take. So, I don't know specifically how we attack some of that stuff, but from a transformation office perspective, it's making sure that we are maintaining the rigor of discipline to not go too fast on an initiative, that we put it out in the wild before we even understand how to look at the things that it's going to impact.
Yeah. Well, so I think just kind of jumping back to, because I think guys like us come out of the software world, I often look at the maturity index of a client based on how I feel their software factory is, right? Like kind of the software teams, the platform teams. Then you go up a level into customer experience, user experience, product strategy. Then to your point, now you're getting into the portfolio. And what I find interesting about what you're saying, and what I've seen in some other companies that have a strong digital marketing organization, that there's kind of a natural conversation when you get into analytics where they're very aware of their funnel and conversion metrics, and then retention metrics on the kind of, the trailing side. And can be a very good advocate for really driving that data-centric decision-making through the building. Are you guys interacting, like, does this correlate to some of the things that you guys are saying? What does collaboration look like between yourselves and the marketing team?
That's actually a really good question, and it's timely, because that was one of our big rocks last year, right? So the mantra of creating profitable accounts at scale and holding for life, right, is we want to make sure that our subscriber adds outpaces our attrition. And so that was an objective, had its measurements around it, what all that meant. And so in order to accomplish that, right? So from an objective standpoint, it became an explicit goal of the organization. So that forced the conversations of, how does the way that we acquire a subscriber impact its attrition? Now, we have kind of a long run rate. In our industry, contracts are, other than the DIY solutions that are out there, which I think is one really attractive aspect of them, is that they are month-to-month contract free. You don't want to get monitored this month, don't get monitored this month. But with your big players in the industry, and us included, the contracts are kind of the status quo, and they're 3-year, right? So sometimes you don't see the impact of the ads until 3 years later, right?
Oh,
so what we've had to do is try to establish some health metrics around that. Within a certain period of time, what is the customer behavior from install and activation to the first few bill cycles? Are they engaging with the customer portal? Are they having to call in for technical support issues, right? Are they? And a lot of those become kind of leading indicators to the degree of retention you're probably going to have with them. So we've been able to identify a measure that we call at risk, and we can tell based on a customer's life cycle and the journey within that life cycle, are they an at-risk customer or not? The goal is to minimize the at-risk, as well as to take them and focus on them as a customer base, to ensure that we are winning them back to being happy with Brinks Home as their provider. And one of the cool things there, though, is that there's a lot of AI that's happening around. If you can measure the components of your customers that are at risk, then you can begin to use AI to determine what are the right kind of offers or messaging to those customers that you should be considering, which then makes the think around handling customers, right? So your customer support person or your retention team that's getting on these phones with the customers, and it's that conversation, interaction, and dialogue, and their ability to make an offer or right the situation that determines if that customer is going to stay or not. Sometimes you hire really good people that are awesome at that. Sometimes you don't. And so through this kind of AI approach, you get these baselining abilities to every person now that's going to get on the phone and talk to your at-risk customer now has an idea of a way to approach that. And some that are already good are going to do phenomenal with that. And some that aren't so good are going to start baselining to good, right? So that was a combination between marketing and sales, because sales handles kind of our customers through an early life cycle piece of their life cycle. And then there's a handoff where they become an existing customer, and really increasing the collaboration between how an account is acquired to how they're sold and their install and activation experiences to shortly after that to 3 years down the road, and being able to tie a lot of that stuff together through collaboration that led to metrics and measurable interactions, has really had a significant impact on our ability to hold these accounts for life.
I think about this term as you're talking, behavioral personas, where now you're getting this data intelligence. And to your point, when I look at field sales organizations or big inside, outside sales structures within companies, this idea, one client referred to it as windows of opportunity, where your best performing customer sales reps or sales reps have just an innate ability to know person that gets product service A also upsells product service, B, but not everyone knows that. And so by closing that loop with your team, being able to define the business case for the net positive sales increase, to look at is it a buy or build of some kind of new technology system we have to roll out and train in the call center or to the reps, and to just run that all the way through is just such an integrated way to have the finance, investment, accounting, the metrics. I mean, it's a level of maturity that I think many people are just still aspirationally, aspiring to.
Agree. And I think that is a prime candidate for digitization, right? Like that is with AI technologies today, like to have your brains come up with a way to deal with a specific persona, right? A behavioral persona, come up with a solution for, right? Identify it, solution for it, package something, train, and then roll out. Like that is a long process, right? And these behavioral personas can change, like people's feeling about their homes completely changed when they were forced to live in them for month over month through COVID, right? Like DIY projects went through the roof, right? Like lumber became scarce, right? And I mean, so this combination of these things of you need to be able to react to that quickly. So if you can digitize some solutions here to where your brains are feeding the AI technology that is coming up with the packages, and you already have a platform that knows how to interface with your salespeople or your customer support people at the point of interaction, then your lead time from going from idea, dealing with a new persona behavior, to being able to react to that real time in those interactions is significantly shortened. And just like in Agile, the quicker feedback loops you get, the faster learning you have, the better you can move toward success, right? So then you start to refine those offerings, you start to refine the reactions to these behaviors. And if you can do that quickly, you're going to be able to weather a lot of different situations, and leveraging technology to do that is a way to get it done. But having a transformation office to help manage and see that priority is kind of a critical component to it.
So maybe kind of last question for you, and then it'd be great to get some advice for others that find themselves, helping stand up these offices in their firm. I was talking to an exec who had worked at a lot of the major telcos, and he talked about how the last mile, the folks installing your cable were all third-party partners that they had. And with their ability to control the end-to-end customer experience stopped with then how well are our partners training their people against our, elements.
Yep.
And so, and I also heard it from some big software resellers where they're like, well, we're not actually selling directly to customers. We're selling through reseller networks that their degree of product, kind of knowledge and things and customer experience may be totally without our control. Are these themes that, do you guys have a partner ecosystem in terms of that? And
absolutely,
how does your office have, where are you in kind of helping them be tightly integrated as you guys see to push new ideas out? They're obviously a critical potential stakeholder in you guys controlling that.
Well, and what's interesting about that, so we do have that model, right? We have dealers out there that are security providers that resell Brinks services, right? So, Joe's Alarm and Windows company, you're driving around, he can represent and sell Brinks, right? So there's a vetting process, onboarding, maintaining performance and stuff. But what I think is really interesting from a TO perspective and digitization perspective or digital transformation perspective is that sometimes those industries dictate technologies that you have to interface with, right? Like dealers all decided at some point, they all moved into, hey, this was the best provider at the time for how we manage our customer interactions and payment collection, et cetera. And so now, how do you as an organization interface with that? And then you start to ask the questions like, do we have the clout and leverage, or is it beneficial for them to adopt our technology, right, through some kind of white labeled approach, or do we need to interface and integrate with those technologies? And if so, what are the maturations of those technologies? How are they innovating, right? Are we going to be coupling ourselves with something that could tank, and now our whole, interactions with these dealers through our technology is at risk, right? And those are really complex and complicated problems to solve, because when COVID hit, like dealers did not have the capability to go door to door. Their need for solutions and their need for help grew dramatically, right? And so then the value that Brinks offered increased significantly. And so that changes the dynamics of the relationships and the opportunities that come from that. And so I think that there's no real, in my opinion, at least, there's no real guarantee that you can control the quality of that at the end of the day. But you do need to recognize that you have to have some kind of visibility into what that looks like, and manage to it is as much as possible. But again, sometimes that just turns into an unknown that you just have to manage as best as possible and be okay with that ambiguity, which is where because you could get into a position where you're like, the performance of our dealer base is not where it needs to be. And it's the easiest, quickest solution is to come down heavy handed, right? And give the mandates of, if you want to still be a dealer with Brinks, you got to do things this way, right? Or whatever that looks like. And then that becomes at the end of the day, those dealers are representing you. They're your customer. You're selling your services to them, and they're reselling that. And if you let that flip to where they're now somebody you're trying to control, then you get the outcomes you get when you try to control customer behavior, in certain ways, right? And so I think it's nuanced in how you're going to approach it and how you're going to manage it, but it's definitely a challenge that I think is across the board. Not to mention, like, in a home utilities, right? Like solar is a big thing, right? So there's opportunities for you to partner with other organizations where they're like, hey, we'll offer to sell and potentially sell your services if your reps are selling and offering ours, so there's opportunities there to expand your market, but then you lose the control of, like, what does that pitch or presentation look like?
Right.
And I think technology can go a long way to help solve that. And we've done that in some levels. We have a configure, price, quote platform that we use, and for some of these more broader base, like they sell all kinds of different home services. Brinks is one of them. We've gotten them to engage selling our services through our platform. So when they present to customers, it's presented in packages and in language and verbiage that we dictate, and the sales come directly into our system. And those are easy to manage, all the way to a dealer that has probably been doing, alarming services as long as Brinks has, and they're going to want to do it their way, so you have to partner with them in a true partnership. And that's relationally as much as it is, through a business deal.
Well, Seth, I think this has been, we've covered a lot of ground. It's been a great conversation. Any parting words that you have?
I think anybody wanting to move into that kind of transformation realm, I think that, the thing that got me started in my career was just being super excited about the potential and capabilities that the internet had to offer. And in my greatest imaginations, when I got into writing code in 1995 to now, like I couldn't even imagine where we are today. It's amazing. And so there's a passion around that. But the thing that I think is like, so digital transformation is just kind of a fit there, man. I'm passionate about the capabilities of technology to really deliver these incredible experiences. But in a digital transformation, the key term there is transformation. And transformation is more about people, culture, and relationships than it is about technology at all. In 50 years from now, technology isn't going to look anything like it looks today, but those fundamentals of people, relationships, and interactions is going to be, the human element is going to be the same. The dynamics of those interactions are going to look different, right? The mindsets are going to be different of those people, but the importance of the relationship is there. So I would highly recommend somebody that is interested in moving into transformation or is currently in transformation to up the ante on how you're viewing relationship development and all the aspects that go around that. So then that puts you off into these books that you're going to read around behavior, right? Around psychology, around you really being somebody that is facilitating a mindset change, a cultural change, and all that is driven by relationships. A couple books that I thought were phenomenal for me in that realm are Tribal Leadership, which is a phenomenal book about how birds flock, whales pod, crows murder, people tribe, right? And so that happens regardless. And understanding what that dynamic looks like and how those interact is really important. But what I love about that book specifically is that they actually give you tools to use to establish influence. And it's all through identifying language and then taking what you hear being said and applying this technique or this tactic in order to leverage people through maturity, operating as a group, as a tribe, which is culture, right? And so it's really a great tool on how to establish culture. The other book is Drive. Really anything by Daniel Pink is going to be phenomenal. But Drive is a really good one on like motivators. And so one of the things it talks about in there is identifying bright spots. So where in your organization are things naturally occurring in approximation to what you want done across the organization? And then how to identify that, B, how to leverage that to scale it across your organization. So our move from the quarterly cadence approach that we take, 2-week sprints into monthly touch points, into quarterly outcomes that accumulate up to annual goals, is taken from some bright spots within the organization that really were executing well on these and beginning to use them as case studies and things that you bring to other parts of the organization. Because to your point, those maturity levels are different. Some people push back, some people been there, done that. And so it's your job to be able to evangelize, communicate, and you need to do it with data and establish credibility outside of yourself. And so really get into customer behavior, motivators, and relationship development and culture development. And that is going to be key to your success in any transformation that you're a part of, whether it's called digital transformation in a transformation office, or if you're literally just trying to make an impact at the organization that you work for because you care. Yeah.
Seth, listen, phenomenal advice there. I think, and to your point at the end, I've had the unfortunate pleasure of going into some orgs that had a couple fits and starts with even an agile transformation. And they said, look, we want to do all these things, but please don't call it an agile. Don't call it agile initiative. Don't call it agile transformation. But I think, your broader points are great. We're really trying to build high performing teams here. You're trying to do that from a place of trust and moving at that speed of trust and allowing those trainers to train the next leaders and, throughout the organization. So a lot of great info here today. Really, thank you for your time, man. And I look forward to following up with you guys to see where this journey takes you.